Hi, and welcome to the DecisionWise Engaging People podcast. This is Charles Rogel. Work here as a senior consultant at DecisionWise, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. Joining me is Dan Hoops.
Hello, everyone.
Dan is a senior, or I should say principal consultant here at DecisionWise. Been here for a few years now, many years now. How many?
About 3 years.
3 years now.
Yeah.
And works with many organizations to work with them on their employee engagement survey results. One of the items that we measure around managing workload, the question we use is the amount of work I'm expected to do is reasonable. And so we measure this and ask, how strongly do you agree with this statement? Sometimes we see some mixed results here. Generally, I'd say from a benchmarking standpoint, 72%, I think, of people agree with this statement. Sometimes we see organizations where it's only at 50%. So there's definitely struggles for a variety of different reasons. And so, Dan, as you see this play out in organizations and it's not working, what are some of the scenarios that typically cause this?
Yeah, well, before I answer that question, let me give you a couple examples that frame my mental models around this and my mindset around this.
Okay.
When I was really young, I was probably 5 or 6 years old. Every winter growing up, we would cut wood and then split it and stack it and burn it in our home to keep our home warm. Mm-hmm. So I was helping my dad one day, and I was 5 or 6 years old. So it's like, what can a 5 or 6 year old do to help split wood and stack it? But it was part of our responsibility of a family of everybody goes out and works.
Yeah, back when there were cabins here in Utah in the old days. Yeah.
Luckily, it wasn't in a cabin. Well, it was about lunchtime, and my mom opens the window, and she's like, okay, time for lunch. So what does a good 5, 6 year old boy do when his mom says, come for lunch?
You run in there and eat.
You will listen to your mom, and you go in for lunch. Well, my dad said to me and asked a very insightful question that has stuck with me ever since I was this young boy. He says, why are you always the last to come and the first to leave? And it's been kind of the standard of my work through my life. So when I'm managing workload, part of what I'm trying to manage is that mindset of why am I the last to come and the first to leave versus just the opposite, the first to come and the last to leave. And when I look at managing workload across a day, I'm not advocating that work is the only thing in life. Mm-hmm. I'm not at all. But I think it needs to be put in perspective with everything else that is going on. When I graduated from high school, me and 3 of my buddies took off for Alaska to work for the summer. Yeah. And we decided that we were going to go work in the fish canneries. Oh, yeah. And we had no idea what it was like, but we got to Cordova, Alaska. I found a camper to live in and would walk the 3 to 5 miles into work and process fish, salmon that were caught during the salmon season. Uh-huh. Well, the first couple of weeks, it was really fun because we'd never done this. Uh-huh. And we're in Alaska, we're looking at the eagles, and we have salmon coming off the boats. And then we realized, this is a 10-hour day, a 12-hour day, or 14-hour day.
Oh, my gosh.
And it got to the point where we started to ask ourselves among the team, when are these fish ever going to stop coming in? Well, the challenge was we'd go out on the docks of these fish canneries, and the tenders were lined up. They had caught their fish. They were coming in to get them processed. Yeah. And I began to realize, there's a lot of work to do. So when I think of the workload, I began to learn at an early age how to segment time periods and what cycle was I in. Uh-huh. Was I in a cycle where, there's a bunch of tenders out in the harbor and we have to get the fish off the boats and we need to process it? Okay, I'm going to work 12 to 14 hours a day, 16 hours a day, whatever it may be, and just get through the work. There are other times when I need to realize, you know what, it's okay to do 8 hours and go do some other things with my life. What I think frames this, what is the amount of work I'm expected to do is reasonable, is defined by the person that thinks they know what reasonable is. Yeah, yeah. That's the conflict between the individual and the manager. Our managers at the fish factory were like, no, we've got fish to process. And I was 18 years old. It's like, well, I want to go fishing and on the EAC. Uh-huh. Well, it didn't work out. So what I think part of the responsibility of the manager is in allocating this work, the work, is one is to do it with them, not to them.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is we can, as managers, enlist the team with real clarity on what is the work, how do we need to do it, how do we allocate the appropriate amount of resources to deliver against that, and we can understand what the beginning is and the end is. Mm-hmm. So that they can begin to see that the light at the end of the tunnel is not a train, meaning that you're simply just going to get run over by more and more work. So doing it with them versus to them, and making sure that we have time to fix it. You know, one of the things that I hear in the consulting is like, oh, we're so busy we don't have time to stop and do it.
Yeah.
Well, somehow you have time to do it wrong and make it a long, drawn-out process and be inefficient. So when we manage workload, is there something that we can do to do a timeout and redo the workload so that we can allocate those resources?
Yeah, improve the process or the efficiency.
Yeah, one of the things we did on my team when things would get really busy here at DecisionWise, in my office we had what we called a stress meter. Mm-hmm. And the members of the team would come in and they would color, you know, I'm in the red zone today, or I'm in the green zone. Well, we put in place an operating mechanism that allowed us to calibrate that through the week. So we'd have our Monday meeting and our Thursday meeting, and every part of that dedicated meeting was looking at the projects that were in the pipeline and then the resources that were available. Mm-hmm. Some people would say, you know what, I have a half hour on Wednesday that I can help. Or I have a really busy Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but I can help out on Thursday. It became, instead of just an individual responsibility of the work about that I'm expected to do, and it shifted to a team where we knew that we had higher resources and more resources to accomplish the task, which I think is one of the downfalls or the pitfalls of that narrow thinking of the amount of work that I am expected to do versus, okay, what is the whole team responsible to do? And my role as a manager is to resource the highs and the lows so that we can manage that over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's a good point because sometimes it's a topic of fairness, right? So you have your star performers who tend to have a higher amount of work to complete because you trust them with the more difficult projects or tasks, and then those that are newer or not so experienced or just not as good tend to maybe have less workload just because they're not as proficient, not as detail-oriented or whatever.
Yeah, welcome to work.
Right?
No, I don't mean that facetiously. Yeah. It really is a true dynamic of every team's going to have individuals that are more experienced, and they're going to have individuals that are less experienced, or they're new to the team. The issue is, am I continuing to learn and grow? And I finding connection to the impact that I am having against the meaning of the organization? When we talk about engagement at DecisionWise, we talk about it in terms of meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. What I have found to be one of the ways to resolve that is if I can connect whatever work somebody is doing to, well, what is the greater reason that we're doing this? So there's meaning beyond what they're doing in itself. And can we see the tangible impact of what we're doing? Yes, people that have been in an organization for a longer period of time, have more experience, may be loaded on resource projects. The balance of a manager is to make sure that they are not the only ones.
Yeah.
Because when we think of the growth aspect of engagement, being stretched and challenged in ways that lead to my growth, work is often the best way to be able to do that. A new project, a new assignment, a new initiative that we're working on, or here's a problem that needs to be solved that we've never looked at it. So that may be the very way to think of the way to resolve the expected workload is actually in looking at how you're resourcing that through those that may not be proficient, so they can use that as an accelerated way to learn.
And a lot of times I see, this idea that workload gets pinched for a couple of reasons. One is there might be a lot of changes going on in the organization, so policies, procedures, whatever, just new regulations maybe you have to adapt to that increases your workload. Or it's kind of a stream of work. Maybe you're down a few people on your team, resource allocation, things like that. Or new systems that have been implemented, or even systems that are breaking down and not reliable, so it causes you. And I think as a manager, you get in trouble if you're not fighting hard enough for your team to kind of get those things fixed or get that new person hired or whatever. So if you're not communicating, or at least on their side about it, it can really cause some frustration.
Yeah, it can. And what happens is we get locked into this mindset of, oh, we've got so much going on, and I need to deliver. I need to deliver.
Yeah.
And we don't break the mindset to look at alternative ways of doing that. Mm-hmm. There was a member of my team. We were a very, very busy season, and I needed to allocate a new project to a member on the team. And I knew the right person. He had the right abilities, the right skills, the right tenure. And I approached him and said, hey, I need you to take this client. And he's like, I can't. I'm too busy. Uh-huh. And that response for me is a triggering response. So when we went back into my office, I was extremely frustrated. Sure. It's like, I know everybody is busy.
Yeah.
And I know the resources and I know the capabilities of everybody on the team. And I was frustrated that
was the response.
That his mindset was, well, I'm too busy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a couple hours later, he came into my office and said, I guess that didn't go really well, did it? And I said, no, it didn't, at least from my perspective. And I said, you need to understand that I have never told a boss no. And he processed that, and he was extremely bright, and we had a wonderful conversation about it. But what it forced him to do was to go back, exactly what you said, look at his systems, his processes, as an efficiencies of how he could be better at what he was doing. Uh-huh. So I wasn't asking for more. I was asking for a change in mindset that would allow him to think through, what am I currently doing that may be getting in the way of me being productive? So when I think of the expected workload, yes, there's a tremendous amount of work, and we know that. Am I as efficient as I can so I can relieve some of that stress versus just saying, well, I'm too busy?
Sure.
And it forced him to look at those, and he actually became one of the highest performing members of my team over that 3 years as anybody that I've worked with.
Yeah, because in essence, when things are really busy, we tend to maybe shut down and not be creative and not consider alternatives or possibilities. But that's the time where you actually need to be more open and more flexible and looking at, okay, what can we trim? What are we doing here that we shouldn't be doing? And it kind of forces the creativity.
Yep, we get locked in our mindsets, and we need to be able to shift that. And one of the ways that I think is able to do that is by having interactions with others that can help you think through that versus going and sitting in your office and alone or your cube. Oh, how do I do this? Well, go ask somebody. Mm-hmm. Get their ideas, get their inputs on how they've managed their workload, because my guess is that individual is not the only person in the organization that may be feeling that stress.
So how do you kind of manage and help people see maybe the light at the end of the tunnel? In other words, that, hey, we got a high level of workload for the next week or month or 6 months, but it's going to get better.
It's being really clear on where we currently are in the cycle. Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier, it's doing it with them versus to them.
Yeah.
If I can make them part of the solution so they can see, oh, here's the 30-day plan, here's the 6-month plan, I know how I fit in there, I know the other roles that other individuals are playing in us being able to execute that gives them hope.
Yeah.
When I talked about the stress meter, the very fact that they felt supported by somebody else, whether it was 30 minutes or 1 hour, if they could talk through the stress that they were feeling, did they have the tools? Did they have the resources? Did they have somebody that just empathized with them?
Sure.
That they could go back. Those were really helpful for that team.
Yeah, 'cause especially if you're working by yourself and you feel all the pressure in the world is on your shoulders and no release, then it gets a lot more stressful.
It does.
Great. Anything else, Dan, that you want to share around managing workload?
Those are the thoughts that I had. Hope those are helpful.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Look forward to having you join us on one of our upcoming podcasts.